Welcome back, Boss Economics World fans, the show where we rip the economic band-aid off the festering wounds of government mismanagement, corporate greed, and the slow-motion train wreck of modern capitalism. I'm your host, the guy who's been screaming into the void about bad policy since the days of dial-up internet, and today, oh boy, do we have a doozy for you. Buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into the latest economic dumpster fire, the U.S. federal workforce cuts, and trust me, this is not just a story about a few bureaucrats losing their desk jobs. This is a masterclass in how to tank an economy, alienate your workforce, and light a match under the powder keg of recession. Let's get into it. Alright, folks, let's start with the headline that's been buried under the avalanche of political spin and feel-good PR. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta just dropped a bombshell analysis saying the U.S. federal workforce, that's direct employees and those indirectly tied to government contracts and grants, could shrink by a jaw-dropping 1.2 million jobs. Yes, you heard that right, 1.2 million. That's not just a trim or a streamline. That's a full-on guillotine to the labor market, courtesy of the Trump administration's latest obsession with slashing government spending like it's a Black Friday sale at the bureaucracy store. Now, before we go any further, let's break this down for the regular folks out there, the ones who've been grinding away, trying to make ends meet, while the suits in Washington play economic Jenga with our livelihoods. The federal government directly employs about 2.4 million people as of the end of 2024, according to the Atlanta Fed's data. But here's the kicker, when you factor in the indirect jobs, the contractors, the grant recipients, the small businesses that rely on government projects, that number balloons to over 8 million people. That's right, 8 million Americans whose paychecks are tied to Uncle Sam's purse strings. And now, thanks to hiring freezes, buyouts, early retirements, and straight-up layoffs, we're looking at a potential 15% gutting of this workforce. To put that in perspective, folks, losing 1.2 million jobs is like wiping out the entire workforce of a state like Maine, twice. And this isn't just some abstract number on a spreadsheet. These are real people, engineers, IT specialists, healthcare workers, construction crews, who are about to get a pink slip because someone in Washington decided efficiency is more important than, keeping the economy from imploding. Now, let's talk about the genius masterminds behind this plan, the Department of Government Efficiency, or as I like to call it, the Department of Glorified Economic Sabotage, DOGES. This brainchild of the Trump administration is all about reducing waste and cutting spending, buzzwords that sound great on a campaign trail but are absolute poison in practice. And don't just take my word for it, the data is screaming the same story. According to the Atlanta Fed's Melinda Pitts, these cuts could have a measurable impact on labor market outcomes. Translation, this is how you tank an economy, folks. But wait, there's more. Bloomberg Economics ran their own analysis and estimated that the DOGE cuts could lead to 535,000 job losses by the end of 2025, a more conservative figure, sure, but still catastrophic. And let's not forget the ripple effects. When you cut 1.2 million jobs, you're not just cutting paychecks, you're cutting consumer spending, tax revenue, and economic stability. The U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, BEA, tells us that consumer spending accounts for nearly 70% of U.S. GDP. So, when you slash jobs and leave millions of families scrambling, you're not just trimming the fat, you're slicing into the muscle of the economy. And here's the kicker, folks, this isn't happening in a vacuum. The U.S. economy is already teetering on the edge of a recession. Just look at the latest data. The Conference Board's leading economic index, LEI, has been declining for 18 consecutive months as of October 2025, signaling a high risk of economic contraction. Meanwhile, the unemployment rate, which was a rosy 4.1% in mid-2024, has started creeping up to 4.5% by Q3 2025, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. Now, throw in 1.2 million job losses, and you've got a recipe for unemployment to spike to levels we haven't seen since the post-COVID recovery. Congratulations, Washington, you've just turned a potential slowdown into a full-blown economic nosedive. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because this isn't just about federal workers, this is about everyone. When you cut jobs, especially on this scale, you create a domino effect that ripples through the entire economy. Let's break it down, step by step, so even the politicians pretending to care can understand. Step 1, job losses kill consumer spending. When 1.2 million people lose their jobs, they don't just tighten their belts, they stop spending altogether. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the average American household spends about $61,000 per year. Multiply that by 1.2 million, and you're looking at a potential $73 billion hole in consumer spending. That's money that's no longer going to local businesses, restaurants, car dealerships, or even online retailers. And when consumer spending tanks, businesses suffer, especially small businesses, which, according to the Small Business Administration, SBA, account for 44% of U.S. economic activity. Step 2, businesses cut back. When businesses see their revenue drop, they don't just sit there twiddling their thumbs, they cut costs. That means layoffs, reduced hours, and cancelled investments. Just look at the latest data from the National Federation of Independent Business, NFIB. As of September 2025, 25% of small businesses reported plans to reduce staff in the next 6 months, up from 18% a year ago. And that's before the full impact of these federal cuts hits. So, congratulations, Doge, you've just turned a government efficiency plan into a private sector bloodbath. Step 3, tax revenue plummets. Here's where the irony gets deliciously thick, folks. The whole point of these cuts was to save money, right? Well, guess what happens when you kill jobs and tank consumer spending? Tax revenue takes a nosedive. The Congressional Budget Office, CBO, estimates that for every 1% increase in unemployment, federal tax revenue drops by about $50 billion annually. If these cuts push unemployment up by even 1.5%, that's a $75 billion hole in the federal budget, wiping out any savings from the cuts and then some. So much for fiscal responsibility, huh? Step 4, the recession spiral. And here's the grand finale, folks, the recession spiral. When consumer spending drops, businesses cut back, tax revenue falls, and the government has less money to spend, the economy starts to shrink. The National Bureau of Economic Research, NBR, defines a recession as a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy, lasting more than a few months. Well, guess what? With GDP growth already slowing to a measly 1.2% in Q3 2025, per BEA data, and these cuts threatening to shave off another 0.5% to 1% of GDP, we're not just flirting with recession, we're practically engaged to it. Now, let's take a step back and ask the million-dollar question, or, in this case, the trillion-dollar question: why does the government keep doing this? Why do they keep pushing policies that sound good on paper but end up as economic train wrecks? Well, folks, it's because our leaders are more interested in scoring political points than solving actual problems. And this isn't the first time they've pulled this stunt. Remember the 2013 sequestration? That was another brilliant idea to cut spending by slashing federal budgets across the board. The result? According to a 2014 report from the CBO, those cuts shaved 0.6% off GDP growth and cost the economy 750,000 jobs. And let's not forget the 2018-2019 government shutdown, which lasted 35 days and cost the economy $11 billion, per the CBO. Time and time again, the government proves that its obsession with efficiency is just a fancy way of saying we don't care about the consequences. And here's the kicker, folks, these cuts aren't even targeting the real waste. If the government were serious about efficiency, they'd go after the $1.5 trillion in annual tax expenditures, those loopholes and deductions that overwhelmingly benefit the ultra-wealthy and corporations. According to the Tax Policy Center, the top 1% of earners receive 24% of all tax expenditure benefits, while the bottom 60% get just 15%. But no, instead of closing those loopholes, we're firing teachers, engineers, and healthcare workers. Brilliant, just brilliant. So, what's the fix, you ask? Well, folks, it's not rocket science, it's basic economics. If you want to avoid a recession, you don't slash jobs and gut consumer spending. Instead, you invest in people, infrastructure, and innovation. Just look at the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, which pumped $800